Hey, warmer from Elo! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for us. We're going to be joined in a few minutes by one of our good friends, Lukas Harkins. He does such great work over at Heat Check CBB, taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball when it comes time for it. He's a really good bracketologist as well. We're going to be chatting with him about a little bit of the lay of the land in the Big East, as I do think that it's one of the more interesting conferences that we're going to find in all of college basketball. He does a Patreon page that is dedicated to the Butler Bulldogs, so we'll certainly flesh that out. We'll talk about a few teams that he's feeling a little bit bullish/bearish on, as well as he does a great job with regards to his bracketology. I know that he's getting set with some of his preseason bracketology updates and some of his preseason just sort of diagnostics of what we might be getting in terms of that field as well. So we'll be chatting about that and so much more with him, as he, much like myself, a Wisconsin sports fan as well. So we always like those guys on this podcast. And if you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @GUnit_81. Keep in mind, Larsium, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. While I did not get in any Twitter/X questions today, everything is powered by EdgeBoost. EdgeBoost is making sure that bettors are able to access their funds whenever and wherever they want, and that 100% of gambling transactions do get approved when you go to edgeboost.bet. Utilize that promo code of Greg, G-R-E-G. That's going to get you a $1 for $1 match on your first deposit up to $25. And now, how about if we do talk with Lukas, and I'll throw this in here as well. For the conference previews, we had quite a few over the weekend. Expect quite a few more over the next few days as well. I'm planning on this weekend us getting probably the Summit League and the SWAC taken care of as well. So be on the lookout for those. We're hard at work trying to get those all taken care of, and I'm talking we as if it's a team. It's myself, but I do have guests that join me, but I am very much hard at work on those, so have no fear there, and have no fear about getting a podcast every single day, because we're up to, I believe now, 2,100 straight days without a missed podcast, so things are consistent there, and a man that is consistent with his great insights is our good friend Lukas Harkins. You're able to follow him on the old Twitter/X at Hardwired Sports. And Lukas, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much.
Thanks as always for having me on. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you, Lukas. And Lukas, I mentioned it at the top. You do a great job of looking at the Big East. You've got your Patreon page looking at Butler Athletics. And just how do you take a look at the Big East for this upcoming season? Because I think that the big bad wolves out there, without question, are St. John's and UConn. I know that there's varying opinions as to which team should be number one coming in, but it just feels like there's a big giant middle in the Big East this year. And I do think that it's going to be really intriguing to see which of these teams is able to bust out, because I know that Butler is certainly going to be one of those teams involved, and you've got a front row view of them. You've been able to do a great job of covering them, and I think that they might be one of the more fascinating teams in this conference, with there being so much pressure on them to make the tournament this year.
I think you're definitely right with St. John's and UConn being kind of in a class of their own coming into the season. Preseason-wise in the league for the Big East, I think before we get into like that middle jumble, I still think Creighton is probably still, even without Ryan Kalkbrenner, I really like Owen Freeman coming into that group. Josh Dix is a good player coming in also from Iowa. Jackson McAndrew coming back. I think that's a group I still feel is a touch ahead of that real like big bubble group, especially with how consistently successful they've been as a program. The middle, I agree with you. It's pretty loaded in terms of just like a bunch of teams that can make runs at a tournament bid. It's not like loaded from the standpoint of top 25 teams, but it's deep in terms of teams that I think can compete on the bubble. Whether that's between a Marquette or Providence, Villanova's got some nice pieces, I think, this year. With Lewis coming in, especially as a freshman, can really, really play. I'm not discounting Xavier or Butler necessarily at the bottom of the league either, as teams that you kind of are probably going to get picked in the bottom 4 or 5 teams, or 4 or 5 teams probably between those two teams that have had traditionally success in recent years. Generally speaking, with the Big East, we've seen a lot of success in terms of coaches that have been consistently successful. And that's where I look at a team maybe like Marquette, with obviously losing some big pieces from last season. Cam Jones is gone, Tyler Joplin's gone, Steve Mitchell. Like, they've lost a lot there, but they've done such a good job of recruit and replace, unlike some other teams that have mostly used the transfer portal. Marquette's obviously been different in that account. And maybe this is the end of that. Maybe this is the time where, like, they've caught up in some ways. Like, Cam Jones and David Joplin were two tremendously good, recruited, developed over years pieces that are now gone. And there isn't that, like, incumbent, clear superstar level player on their team. But I think that Shaka Smart's been so consistently successful with his own internal development that theirs might be someone waiting, whether that's a Chase Ross or Sean Jones, Ben Gold, that takes a really big step this year. I think they're one of those teams that I feel most confident in the middle just because of those coaches that have had continued success in the league.
And I think it really works both ways with Marquette as well, because I do value teams that they continue to be consistent. They aren't going out there in the transfer portal and overhauling the roster year in and year out. It's still a little bit off-putting that they don't utilize it at all, though, because the one guy that they brought in via the transfer portal, Tyler Kolek, that turned out pretty well for them. So it does make me think, man, well, the one time they used it, it worked out quite well. Why not use it a little bit more? But I think the big question for myself for Marquette is really that point guard spot, because just with Shaka Smart and what he's been able to do over at Marquette, it has been all hinging upon a guard that's able to do it all. Like we knew that Cam Jones last year was going to be able to take that stride forward. And that's a big question mark that I've got with Marquette, because while I do agree with you that Golden Company, I think that they're going to be able to take some big leaps forward, that main ball handler role is still where I do have my question marks with this team.
Yeah, I'm with you. But I just think that this is a group that they have a lot of pieces that are back from last season and have developed together. And I think that kind of every time I start to doubt Marquette under Smart, now, granted, there isn't a Kolek coming back that is really good. There isn't a Cam Jones coming back that is really good. By really good, I mean like all-American level good. You don't have that kind of guy coming back this season, but it just seems like every time I start to doubt them, and I grew up a Wisconsin fan, I want to doubt them. But like every time I feel like that there's someone, or like even if it feels like, okay, Cam Jones is going to have to jump into this role, which means someone has to backfill his spot. It kind of always feels like that guy just still comes to play. So I think that they're a team that I probably feel most confident being in that 4 or 5 spot in the preseason coming into the league. Behind that, as we already mentioned, the super stud group of UConn and St. John's, and I still like Creighton a touch ahead of those other teams in the middle of the pack.
Yep, absolutely. And I do think that it's going to be a lot of fun to be diving in on those middle teams. As joining me on the show, we do have Lukas Harkins. He does great work over at HeCheck CBB. He's joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And I do think that there's a lot of intrigue with some of those middle teams, because you mentioned it with Marquette, the fact that they've got a lot of returning guys, but at the same time, they didn't utilize the transfer portal as much. And this is a team that actually returns quite a bit as well, that I feel like goes a little bit under the radar. And it's a team that we really didn't mention in passing, and that'd be Providence, because I think Oswin, I always get the last name wrong, so we'll just call him Oswin, is going to be able to take some nice strides down low. He's going to be one of the better forwards in this conference. I'm curious to see how Jalen Sellers is able to fit in with his backcourt, but I do have a lot of belief in Kim English as a coach. Duncan Boom Boom Powell is a very versatile player, and I feel like Providence could be one of those surprise teams in this conference as well, because we know how great their home court advantage is as well.
Yeah, I think that's my middle tier. I mean, after we get through the St. John's and UConn, and I have Creighton in 3, that 4, 5, 6 to me, I think you can kind of go in any direction between Marquette, Providence, and Villanova. I still like that Nova roster with guys coming back, and obviously I think the stud freshmen coming into play big minutes as well. I think that that's my middle tier. So I'm with you on Providence. I think they're due for kind of one of those bounce back-ish years into the mix for an NCAA tournament bid, and kind of that real middle of the conference that could go either direction towards finishing in the top 3 or 4 or finishing more towards the bottom end. I think Providence, I have more up in that 4, 5, 6 range than I do the teams that are behind them.
Yep, I'm right there with you there. And then I do think that the team that I mentioned that you do such a great job of covering with Butler, they feel to me like a team that has a lot of upside, and I do want to dive in with that with Lukas on the flip side. I also do want to address the fact that St. John's really doesn't have a point guard right now. I have a little bit of concern there, how there's a lot of talent in general with St. John's, but there might be a little bit of early season struggle, and with our good friend Lukas, he does a great job with his bracketology, so we'll ask if there's a few teams that he's feeling bullish/bearish on in comparison to where many other people have them rated and projected for the upcoming season. That's up next, right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always great to be joined by Lukas Harkins. He does great work over at HeCheck CBB. Just an absolutely fantastic bracketologist. You're able to follow him on the old Twitter/X at Hardwired Sports. And we've been talking a lot about the Big East. We've talked about some of the mid-tier teams, and the team that you cover very well because you do a Patreon page for them. That is Butler, and I really do think that there's quite a bit of upside, and there's a lot of intrigue with this Bulldogs team. They do feel like one of those floaters that where if everything goes right, I do think that they could be able to ascend to like the top 5 and be able to make the NCAA tournament, but I could see it going a little bit wrong as well because with Thad Matta, it's been, let's call it what it is, a little bit touch and go over the first few years here with the Butler Bulldogs, and I just want to get your thoughts here because I know that there's a lot of places that do project them more in the bottom 3, bottom 4 of the conference, but Finley Bizjack, I think, is an underrated guy that comes back for them. Michael Ajayi, we remember 2 years ago, he was a very rock-solid player out there in the WCC, just it felt like got lost in the sauce over at Gonzaga last year, and Yohan Traore is a former top 75 recruit that began his career at Auburn. He put up big numbers the last 2 years over at SMU and also UC Santa Barbara, and I think they can very much compete in the Big East, and at 6'11", he's got the size that Butler, in my opinion, really needs and has been lacking the last few years.
I mean, it's tough to look at because, like, on paper, I think you're right in a lot of ways, but, like, we came into last season and Butler had 2 preseason all-conference guys, Janelle Telford and Pierre Brooks. They weren't good enough to contend for an NCAA tournament bid, and that was with Patrick McCaffrey coming in and playing pretty darn well as a transfer last year. And I think you look at this season, rock solid on Finley Bizjack. I mean, he was awesome down the stretch last season, really came into his own, especially not just as a shooter, but really being able to look for his own shots and taking the right shots and getting there. I think he's got enough to be the real go-to scorer on this year's team. And you're right, Ajayi's proven himself at levels, and I think that he should make the transition well into maybe a more featured role than he had at Gonzaga. On the wing, I mean, Jamie Kaiser and Yame Butler give you pretty good options. I think the real key is what Butler gets out of its 1 and 5 spots. Jalen Jackson, I really, really like as a player coming over from Purdue Fort Wayne. I really like what he brings. He did not shoot the ball well from 3 last year, but did shoot it well the year before that. He's a really, really good paint toucher, rim pressure guard. Those are really hard to project in terms of how they do for the transfer from the Horizon League to the Big East. If Weather is able to maintain that ability both to get to the rim at that rate and finish at the rate he has is going to be really important. And you talked about Yohan Traore at the 5, but it's just Traore and Drayton Jones really as options at the 5. So both those guys have to stay healthy and productive. You highlighted Traore. I really do think Drayton Jones is going to be the guy that kind of brings stability to Butler's 5 spot because he's got 2 years of eligibility left. He gives you some shot blocking and ability to really run the floor more so than Butler's had at that spot in the past couple of years. So hopefully he's the guy who can really step into playing significant minutes. Though he's had significant foul trouble issues in his career at South Carolina State, not to mention what the jump is going from the MEAC to the Big East. So I think that in particular, it's that Jalen Jackson at the 1 and then how the real platoon that's going to have to play probably all 40 minutes all season long, best case scenario is between Jones and Traore at the 5. Those 3 guys, I think, are going to really tell a lot about what the ceiling and the floor is for this particular team. I think the floor, as you've discussed, is going to be one of those bottom-ish teams, bottom 2 or 3 teams in the Big East. But there's certainly a ceiling if it all clicks. They've got the shooting with Bizjack and Butler, and theoretically, Jamie Kaiser out of high school is a really good shooter. They have more of that shot blocking up front with Jones, and Jalen Jackson gives you much more rim pressure as a point guard than Butler's had, as Butler was really, really heavily leaned on the floater last season as opposed to getting all the way to the rim. So I think you'll see a stylistic change. But as you relate it back to last season's preseason, they were more highly regarded last preseason with 2 guys who were preseason all-conference. This season, they're going to be probably picked in the bottom 3 or 4 teams. They don't have one of those preseason guys unless the coaches are also high on Bizjack continuing the end of last season. Maybe he gets a second team kind of nod. But they don't have that kind of preseason acumen that they had last season, and even last season they disappointed. So there's a wide range of outcomes here. I think the most common one you'll see coming into the year is more on the lower end of that.
Yep, absolutely. And I do think that there's going to be a lot of intrigue with regards to this team, and them being able to add some size down low in the transfer portal, I thought was absolutely massive for them. And what else is absolutely massive is the 2 teams I mentioned at the top that I feel like they are the big bad wolves in this conference in UConn and St. John's. They are going to get a lot of the preseason love, and very rightfully so. But I don't know about you, but I'm just a little bit concerned about St. John's in the non-conference portion of things, because I know that we've had Slick Rick Pitino saying that, point guard play it really doesn't matter and everything like that, which I think he's just trying to take pressure off of his guys. And I think that St. John's is very, very rock solid. If you look at the overall talent itself, they're probably a top 5, top 6 team in all of college basketball. I'm just right now wondering how everything comes together, because right now their point guard options, it feels like it's Ian Jackson, who really didn't play that over at North Carolina. Dylan Darling was rock solid, but he was over at the Big Sky Conference last year, and that to me just has me feeling a little bit more questionable about them rather than UConn coming into the season.
Yeah, I mean, as far as these two teams are concerned, obviously winning the Big East championship or Big East tournament title would be huge. But I think their expectations coming into this year are built more on what they can do in March, and perhaps for both teams built on what they could do in April. And I think when you get to that point in the season, it's less about how I feel where they're gonna stack up as 1, 2, or even if either one fell to a 3 or 4, even in the Big East as the season went on. But for St. John's, I think talent easily gets them to March, probably as a pretty significant single-digit seed. And by that point, you should have figured out what's the plan for how we can attack March. And I think that that's what this team is really guiding on, is how they can make a deep run in the NCAA tournament. I think the talent that they have affords them the time to gel that group together.
I do have to throw this out here as well. Could you perhaps see St. John's being one of those teams that maybe a bet against early, that they're just like laying 25 points, there's a little bit of, shall we say, wonkiness in the backcourt, and then they figure it out a little bit late? Because those are some of the teams that very much intrigue me, and it almost, to me, rivals a team much like we saw when Eric Musselman was over at Arkansas for those years, where they would struggle, they would like lose a game or two that they weren't supposed to in the non-conference portion of things because guys were trying to figure out their roles, but then they would ascend late. That, to me, is sort of what St. John's feels like, in my opinion, because they've got obviously all the talent. I just think that it's going to take a little bit of time for those pieces to really know their role.
I agree, but it's also Rick Pitino. And I think there's so much of the discussion around St. John's this offseason has been exactly what we've been discussing, that it might take time to get up. Like, Rick Pitino already has bulletin board material. If they think it's going to take this amount of time for us to gel, let's go win by 30. It wouldn't surprise me if he just kind of just like stepped on the offseason discussion of it's going to take time for all these guys to gel. They just immediately rock. That's a real possibility, in my opinion, just because of how his teams have just kind of seemingly always risen to the occasion when they've been talked about negatively in any capacity. Even if this team is a preseason top 10, 15 team in the country, there's already material out there for him to be like, this is what they think we're going to be in March, but let's show them that that's who we are in December.
And I think that that's such a great point that you bring up, because there's a point to it about it taking a little bit of time, and then there's a counterpoint of, oh yeah, it's still Rick Pitino, and so Rick Pitino still knows what the heck he's doing. And another man that knows what the heck he's doing, that'd be our good friend Lukas Harkins, who does great work over at HXCBB, joining me on Coast to Coast Soup. I mentioned it in passing, you do a great job with your bracketology, and I know you're getting set for the upcoming season, and typically with bracketologists, I think that this is the case for yourself as well. You're able to add in there a little bit more of your spice and your own opinion, as opposed to just mimicking what the committee is able to do. I have Rocco Miller on this podcast quite a bit. He does a great job on the bracketology front as well, and he talks a lot about that. And when it comes to your bracketology prior to the season, I'm not sure if you've got it finished or not, but are there a few teams that are standing out to you that maybe you feel either a bit higher or lower on coming into the season the most?
I haven't really dove into it too much yet. I just kind of have let the chips fall as they have for the offseason, and then kind of getting back into that as we started to hear a little bit more reports on how certain transfers are gelling, maybe some freshmen are gelling. So I haven't really quite gotten there. I think we've already discussed a little bit that I'm a little bit higher on Marquette than some other teams. Obviously that's a league I cover closely, so that's perhaps a little bit of my own bias in terms of how I've seen Marquette continually exceed some expectations in recent years. They're a team I'm a little bit higher on. I really like Oregon bringing back both Biddle and Shelstad. I think that 1-5 duo is about as good as it's going to get in the country. That's a team that I haven't seen in every preseason top 25, but probably should be. I feel the same way about a Virginia this year. They're going to play a whole lot differently under a new head coach, new system, but I think they're going to play faster. But I do like what they have in terms of really sprayed out point guard that can really dish out to shooters, and they've got a lot of shooters in that. They added a lot of shooters in the portal. Really like their international class in the 4-5 spot that they're bringing in this year. I think they're a group that I'm interested in. At the absolute top of the country, talking 10, 15 teams in the country, I think Christian Anderson is really going to take another big step this year with Texas Tech. They already have JT Toppin, who's a National Player of the Year contender, but you add in Christian Anderson as another first-team all-conference level guy. I think he can take a step into that role this season and give them two really, really superstar level talents to get them a top 10 team that can contend for one of those top 2 or 3 seeds come March. I think those are a couple teams that I'm really looking forward to seeing, in particular because of how either transfer classes come together or how much I think kind of one guy can really take a step from star into superstar level this season.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that it's going to be a lot of fun to take a look at those teams. We've obviously got a lot of intrigue in the Big East, and I know that you do such a great job of covering that conference, Lucas, but you really do a great job of being able to cover the entire scope of college basketball. You're hard at work getting set for what is going to be an amazing season. So let the good people at home know what's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Thanks as always for having me on. I write my stuff over at Heat Check College Basketball, other stuff specifically on Patreon. You can find me on Twitter at Hardwired Sports. We've made the turn into September. We're coming close the last month or so, a couple months or so until it's college basketball season. It's time to really get all those notes that we've compiled the last few months and kind of put them into some real organization and get ready for some preview stuff down the stretch here.
We are getting closer and closer. I know that makes Lucas very excited. That makes me very excited. And I know that Lucas is going to do an amazing job with bracketology once the season comes around, and he's doing a great job all 12 months out of the year taking a look at the sport that we all know and love. So big thanks to Lucas for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. And if you do like what you're hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters CM, name does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season. And once again, you're going to be getting a lot of conference previews over the next few weeks. And I plan on within the next 72 to 96 hours unleashing at the very minimum one more conference preview. If not, I will try to have the SWAC and the Summit League up within the next 96 hours. So be on the lookout there and be on the lookout for a fresh podcast tomorrow. So I'm with you guys every single day. So appreciate you tuning in today, and I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.